In our stillness, other movements became more palpable. For me, one important clock ended up being an individual buckeye tree in a park that I always walk through. This tree grows leaves and flowers in the spring and goes dormant in the late summer. But that procession is uneven across the region, across a grove, across the branches of the same tree, or across the surface of a yellowing leaf. The body of the tree itself is also a record of the past, since the buckeye's ability to go dormant is an evolutionary response to a change in the climate 3 million years ago. And so I write, what is a clock? If it's something that tells the time, then my branch was a clock. But unlike the clock at home, it would never return to its original position. Instead, it was a physical witness and a record of overlapping events, some of which happened long ago and some of which are still occurring as I write this. And those images are also in the book. This is also a text exchange from last month when my boyfriend was here and I was in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and we're observing that the clock is the same in both places. Okay, so what I just described is something that I describe in the book as unfreezing something in time. I write, if you want to see time that isn't fungible, just pick a point in space, a branch, a yard, a sidewalk square, a webcam, and simply keep watch. A story is being written there. The story is inseparable from the story of all life, even yours. And while it might be fascinating and enlivening for us to unfreeze things in time, there is also an ethical dimension to doing so. Because to see something as inhabiting time with you is to consider that it has experience. While researching for this book, I was really floored by a study on something called the lesser minds problem. That's what it sounds like. It's a name for our bias to see the inner lives of other people, especially people we consider to be in outgroups, as not as complex as our own. And so in one of the experiments, people were asked to consider typically dehumanized outgroups, such as drug addicts or people without housing. Ordinarily, for those participants, thinking about people in those groups wouldn't activate regions of the brain associated with theory of mind. But what the researchers found was that by simply asking the participants whether or not a houseless person would like a certain vegetable, those neural regions became activated. In other words, and in my interpretation, the question about the vegetable presumes a person with preferences and desires. And desire, an attitude toward the future, and a reflection of one's past can only exist in time, the time inhabited by that person. This notion of frozenness or unfrozenness has broader implications, namely regarding the climate crisis that increasingly interrupts the human calendar. Just like the concept of time as money is a political history, so too is the division of who and who does not inhabit time, i.e., who has experience and who acts on the historical stage. The Jamaican theorist Sylvia Wynter has written about how the Western notion of man versus nature defined man against colonized people who were characterized as timeless, backward, or less progressed, part of the similarly timeless landscape, and in my formulation, frozen. In that same book I mentioned earlier, The Colonization of Time, the author quotes a letter from the daughter-in-law of a British missionary in what is now South Africa, in which she writes, "You must know that today we have unpacked our clock and we seem a little more civilized. For some months we have lived without a timepiece. John's chronometer and my watch have failed, and we have left time and been launched onto eternity. However, it is very pleasing to hear tick, 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 and ding, ding." For me, this suggests an important connection, that the same framing that has allowed us to juice the supposedly inert, non-experiencing natural world dry is the same one I mentioned earlier in which laborers have been juiced of their supposedly fungible lifetimes. It also explains why we feel that there is cultural human time, which moves forward and makes things, and natural non-human time, which is cyclical and insubstantial. It's an echo of that supposed hierarchy of the eternity and tick, 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 and ding, ding. As Bill McKibben has pointed out, the irony of this conceptual divide is that what is thought of as human cultural time actually can't keep up with the changes in what is thought of as non-human time. In that vein, I argue a lot in this book for non-human subjecthood, and that's one of the reasons I rely so much on Indigenous scholarship. Like those scholars, and like McKibben, my reasoning is partly practical. I really don't believe that a true holistic response to either time scarcity or the climate crisis is possible without such a change in perspective.